Every 2 minutes, someone is sexually assaulted in the United States. Today we speak with David Wraith, co-founder of Sex Positive St. Louis, on what men and women can do to break the rape cycle.
And now let's choose to live, let's choose to love, let's choose to get back to what's real. And if we all can be open, we can be honest, and we'll all be the beautiful kind.
Welcome back to the Exorcist House and the Beautiful Kind. Such a great combination. And now we've added the special ingredient, David Wraith. David Wraith is one of my very good friends. We're thick as thieves, and we are co-founders of Sex Positive St. Louis. And the reason why, the topic of the show is how to prevent rape. And I think that we've got some answers here, which is very bold to say, but the idea for this show came from us doing a talk at Slut Walk, St. Louis in July. And that talk was videotaped and then stashed away somewhere on someone's computer. And someday it might surface on YouTube. But until that time comes, I think we can do a really good job reviewing some of the stuff we talked about. And the topic of that one was about how it is that two people can have sex and the next day someone's feeling really sick and awful about it and the other one thinks it's cool. And so there's this huge disconnect on intent and people going into sexual situations and signals, body language, all that stuff. Do you know of any women in your social network who have not been raped or sexually assaulted?
That's a good question. I'm sure I do. I mean, I'm sure there's some who have been raped or sexually assaulted and just haven't told me. I don't know of anyone who said definitively that they've never been sexually assaulted, and I know a great number of women who have been, a remarkable number of women who have been.
Yeah, every time I talk to someone about their experience, I've never once had someone say, "Nope, not me. Nothing's ever happened to me." Ever. It's really amazing.
Well, I was talking to a friend of mine last night who's a counselor, and she's worked with like juvenile offenders and sexual offenders, and one of the things that we discussed was that most men, unless they were molested as children or in a very strange circumstance, were sexually assaulted themselves as adults, which I know happens, but I personally think it's somewhat rare, will never understand what women go through throughout their lives, and that most women, a lot of women I know, whether or not they've been, I hate to break it up into categories, but whether or not they've been subject of like a violent rape, most women have been a victim of some sort of sexual assault on some level, whether it's, or sexual, and just about all women have survived some form of sexual harassment, whether it's just, really lewd comments to groping or, all the way up to rape. And so, and it's usually not just a single event in their lives, it's usually different degrees throughout their lives. And I think that most men just never could understand what that's like. If a man is sexually assaulted, in some cases it's usually like a singular event, where for women it's usually different levels, different degrees, but throughout their lives, basically.
Yeah. One thing that was fascinating to me about Slut Walk, of many things, was after we gave our talk and I spoke on the stage about some of my own rape experiences. I have several. After I got off stage, a line of people got in front of me, and each of them wanted to tell their stories to me because they got to hear mine, and it compelled them to share their story because it's something that they've been holding inside. And each one of those people had 2 or 3 stories that started out when they were a kid into their teenage years, and then they throw one, or in the adults to whatever. It seems like each stage of life they were assaulted by different people in their families, in their social networks, in their communities, and not really strangers, more about people who knew them. One was a man. He was sexually assaulted 3 times by a father figure and a friend, and his girlfriend, his sister's boyfriend sexually assaulted him. It's just amazing how people can see someone and target them and see them as someone vulnerable that they can do stuff with and get away with it.
Yeah, it was one of the most emotional things about the experience of Slut Walk for me was women and you know, and I'm not just counting men, but people who self-identified as rape survivors, either with the signs they carried during the march or to me personally between workshops. And there were women who got up during the workshops and got on the microphone and self-identified as rape survivors, and it was intensely emotional experience. And not to go into anything negative, but you know, a lot of the people that have problems with slut walk, some which, you know, I agree with, some which I don't. A lot of the people that I've heard complaints about slut walk from weren't actually there, but the people who were there, it was such a cathartic experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if you weren't there, I don't think you can really appreciate how powerful it was.
Yeah, I knew that there would be some emotions brought up then, but I didn't really. It was so intense, and I feel like people really needed aftercare and a really safe space to just be able to come to terms with some of the feelings that got stirred up that day. So it was really nice to be surrounded by everyone who had that shared, common, caring sort of feeling. So I guess I could go on and on about it, but I want to share briefly something that happened to me. I've had several different situations happen to me in my life, and one experience I had was when I was working at a nursing home, and there was another man who was in his early 20s, and he was in nursing school, and he was an exchange student from Africa. He was from Cameroon, and he was going to Maryville College, and he was very Christian, and he and I became friends. And he knew I was looking for a place to live. I was looking for a place to rent. So he said he had a friend who had a house that he was renting out, and he could take me to this house and show it to me. So we were friends. We weren't dating. There was no any sort of flirting going on. And I went to this house with my friend, and we walked into this house, and it was empty and cold, and we were alone. And I looked it over, and I was thinking, yeah, I probably can't afford this. And then we're in a bedroom, and he pushed me down on a bed and just started raping me. It was absolutely not violent. I was so shocked. I was just shocked that it was happening. I was wearing jeans, I remember, and he just took the jeans off like it was butter. He was so strong, and I just was like, no, 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 and it just happened, and it was so, I couldn't believe it. And then after it happened, I guess I really have blocked out a lot of it because it was so shocking to me that afterwards I just got out of there and got in my car and just cried and cried. And then I had to go meet my mom for lunch. And I went and met my mom for lunch. And I remember that day we went to the mall, and it was so surreal that I was just thinking, that just happened? And I was so shocked. Okay, so then it takes time to process something like that. Again, it was not violent. I can't imagine getting punched in the face and all that stuff. I mean, it was just very matter of fact, kind of, yes, you're a woman and I shall take you now. I don't know. And so the next couple of days I was at work with my friends, and I told one of my friends, I said, oh my God, that guy raped me. And it was absolutely out of the blue. And she went up to him later. She was really pissed about it, and she confronted him. She said, how could you do that to my friend Kendra? And he was absolutely astonished. He didn't think he did anything wrong. He was absolutely like, what? What are you talking about? He didn't deny it happened. He just thought it was a matter of course or something. I don't know. So talk about a breakdown in communication. Talk about a disconnected sort of situation. So what could I have done in that situation better? I think about that. What could he have done better? And so that's what I want to ask you. How do we prevent these breakdowns of communication where one person is crying in their car and the other one's thinking, that was good?
Before we really get into that, I want to have as a disclaimer, say that I have absolutely no training in this area. So if you're a rape survivor or a counselor or a professional in this area, and you hear what I say and you think I'm completely full of it, by all means call me out on it.
Leave a comment on this podcast.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Or davidwraith@yahoo.com. Let me know. I'm just someone who has opinions on the subject. An event like rape it's like a car accident. It's like hitting an iceberg. You can, if you see it coming from 100 yards away, how you can prevent it is very different from when it's right there. And so, I don't want to. I think that rape prevention or sexual assault prevention, there's how we prevent it from the woman's perspective, and there's how we prevent it from the man's perspective. And I have opinions on how we prevent it from a female perspective, but I'm much more comfortable about talking about it from the male perspective, because I feel like it's one of these issues that we look at as a women's issue or a woman's problem, even though the vast majority of the time it's male perpetrators.
And it's a male problem.
Right. And we are the perpetrators, so I think it's our responsibility as individuals and as a gender, as a community, to make rape prevention and sexual assault prevention a priority. And so there's how we prevent rape culturally, there's how we prevent rape educationally, how do we raise our sons, how do we talk to our friends, how do we interact with our peer group, and then there's, as individuals, it sounds strange to say, how do we as individuals prevent rape or prevent ourselves from rape or sexual assault? But you have to look at it this way, because it's an individual action. It's a man raping, usually a woman. Mm-hmm. I mean, I hate to do gender stereotypes,
There's
but
a scenario for everything.
Numbers are numbers.
Uh-huh.
And so I think one of the things is that men, this is going to sound far-fetched, but you recommended one of your clients to me for a consultation, and we were just talking about his problems with women, and he mentioned that he really fears rejection. And this is not a violent individual by any stretch of the imagination, but one of the things that I talked about with him is that one of the important parts of socializing, and regardless of your gender or your sexual orientation, but specifically for heterosexual men, is learning to cope with rejection and deal with rejection and having coping strategies. And this is going to sound like a reach, but I think that on a certain level, this inability to deal with rejection triggers some men to rape and sexual assault. We have an image in our head of how a scenario is going to play out, and it's going to end with us having sex, and that's awesome. And then the woman puts forth resistance. We don't know how to deal with it. We have not prepared ourselves for that outcome or that scenario.
You don't have the tools in place to deal with that situation.
So the best case scenario is that it's just awkward or embarrassing, and you feel bad and you don't want to see this person again because you feel stupid or rejected or hurt. But then the worst case scenario is that men and women, we're equals, intellectual, all things being equal, we're intellectual equals, but all things being equal, men are stronger than women. We are socialized to be more physical and more aggressive than women. We're socialized to get what we want, be assertive. And I think that when all else fails, men can fall back on our physical
sense of entitlement,
but also our physical strength, our physical aggression. And so when you combine a sense of entitlement with, because, if a woman feels entitled and she wanted to rape me, unless she's like a bodybuilder or just, really strong, she's probably not going to be successful. Whereas a man probably will be successful. And oftentimes women are also, just as men are socialized to be aggressive and assertive, women are often socialized to acquiesce. And so either out of a sense of obligation or fear of physical violence, it's a choice between being raped and beaten or just being raped. Some women will acquiesce just so that, the sexual aspect is the worst that happens. She doesn't get, physically assaulted as well. So we have to give men coping strategies. And as men, we have to give ourselves coping strategies to deal with rejection if it's a trigger. And we have to know what our triggers are before we get into a situation where we're alone with a woman and we could potentially act out violently. That's a lot to ask, I think. From the type of men who are probably susceptible to physical assault, that's probably a lot to ask. But it absolutely has to be asked, because asking a woman to deal with rape is an even greater thing to ask.
Yeah. So with my situation that I described a few minutes ago, you would think that the things I could have done to prevent that, the obvious things, don't go into a house alone with a man, don't think a man can be your friend, I don't know, don't go out of your house, don't get in touch with people. That's how you prevent rape. But I think the biggest thing that I did that day was, being in my early 20s, I was absolutely not as confident as I am now. I wasn't as sure of myself. So when I got in that situation, I did say no, and I did push against him. And then I thought about, do I gouge his eyes out? Do I do something like that? And then if I do that, is it going to hurt him? And then he's going to hurt me? And do I just let this get over with? And that's what I did. But I feel like if I would have been more assertive and more firm and you don't know what's happening when it happens, but just knowing yourself more. And women are always so often told to go with the flow and not rock the boat, and that's what I was doing. And so if I could be more strong, and nowadays I feel like I'm better equipped and better handled because I'm so confident. I've had 20 years more experience, so that's what I have going for me now. But I want to teach my daughter and younger and teenage girls, I want to teach them those sort of skills early on to make it more preventative and make them feel more empowered. I want them to feel more empowered. That's what I would suggest for women. And so for men,
I think both genders need self-esteem training. And I think that because if women are taught to have self-esteem, they'll feel less obligated to acquiesce to a man's sexual desires if they're unwanted. I think that and also in the cases where women are sexually assaulted, they're more likely to speak out, they're more likely to go to the police, to go to their friends, to, tell someone it happened. I think if men are given self-esteem training, which it may sound, contradictory, because maybe men have too much self-esteem and that's where this entitlement comes from. But I think if men have true self-esteem training, we will not place our value or our worth as men on how often we can get laid, how many women we can get, and B, if we have true self-esteem, our fragile male egos, our very sense of masculinity will not be so vulnerable to rejection. The thought that any woman that we desire doesn't want to be with us, it will not be so traumatic to our sense of self and our sense of manhood
that you have to lash out
have
or
to act
react
out
in some
to.
way.
Because I feel like, masculinity is so fragile, and our sense of manhood is so fragile, but we have to pretend that it's rock solid, that it's impenetrable.
That you're badass.
And exactly. And when women reject us, it's a blow to our ego, it's a blow to our sense of masculinity, and we feel like we've been wronged. We feel like we've been slighted. The scales of
You've been cheated?
Masculinity are off, and we have to right them. We have to level the playing field.
You have to do something.
Yeah, we have to get even. We have to reassert ourselves and reclaim our manhood. And that can lead some guys to sexual assault and rape. And we have to learn that our masculinity is not based on, how many notches we have on our belt, how many women we've had sex with, the fact that, I'm irresistible, because you hear that all the time. You hear this sort of, braggadocio on the part of men, like, you leave me with her for 5 minutes, 10 minutes,
Oh my gosh. Well, I do want to ask you the big loaded question as the man in the room.
Always.
I always
TBK question every podcast. It's like Terry Gross on Fresh Air. Go right ahead.
So have you ever raped someone?
Honestly, I've never raped anyone, but I have sexually assaulted someone, and this was something that I confessed for the first time publicly before a live audience at Slutwalk, a couple hundred people. And yeah, that was a very intense moment. And I did not know that I was going to tell that story, but Kendra dragged me on stage and handed me a microphone. And Kendra didn't know that I was going to tell that story. But 20 years ago, I was at a friend of mine's house. It was myself, another man, and another woman. We were all teenagers. So another young man and another young woman. And our female friend was inviting another female friend over. And her friend was leery of coming into an empty house with, one girl and 2 teenage boys. And my female friend was telling her, oh, don't worry, this guy's cool, and don't worry about David, he's harmless. And for whatever reason, in my 17-year-old brain, or 16-year-old brain, however old I was at the time, the word harmless triggered me, and it really felt like an assault on my ego, an assault on my manhood, the fact that I was harmless. It was like she was, robbing me of my sexual agency.
She emasculated you?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, and this was a really good friend of mine. Like, this is someone I cared a lot about, and we're still friends 20 years later. And I said, "Oh, I'm harmless, huh?" And I grabbed her and I threw her down on the floor, and I started tearing her clothes off. And I know, and
That's so
she
intense.
was fighting back and making it difficult for me to get her undressed. So I looked at the guy who was in the room with us, and I said to him, "What are you doing just standing there? Get over here and help me, hold her down." And in retrospect, I think what I was really asking him to do was to stop me. But I couldn't say, "Stop me."
Right,
So I
yeah.
said, "Get over here and help me," which he did. And he
Oh.
was closer to her than he was to me. So I was really stunned that her friend was
betray her.
essentially helping me rape her. Because, I mean, that's the logical conclusion of the story. I mean, what else did he think I was doing?
Right.
And I was really shocked to see him. It was like seeing a mirror of myself. It was like I could see what was happening when I saw him holding her down, so I could get her clothes off. And I didn't know how to stop. Like, once I'd committed myself.
Once you turn the corner,
Right.
then
Like, how do you stop
and
with,
say, "Okay, this is getting a little."
yeah, how do you stop with, like, a half-naked woman that you're holding down on the floor and go, "Oh, my bad, I'm
What was I
sorry.
thinking?
What was I thinking?" So I didn't know what to do. So I just kept going.
Oh my God.
And if something happened, I think his mother came home unexpectedly. Some third party showed up, and I had to stop. And I still couldn't admit that I was wrong or that I realized what I was doing was wrong. I had to sort of stay in this character. So I just remember grabbing her clothes off the floor and throwing them at her and saying, "I'm done with you, get dressed." And I mean, it's still kind of, I haven't told that story a lot, and it still kind of messes with me, all
Right.
these years later, to think that I was able to do that. But what happened in my case was I had great parents. My parents raised me very well. So this was not something I was conditioned to do from an early age.
You weren't watching this happen at home.
No,
You weren't.
absolutely not. I was raised better than this. In my early teenage years, I came into contact with someone who was very physically abusive to the women in his life, and very psychologically and emotionally abusive to the people around him, including me, and physically abusive with me. And that was kind of the fork in the road for me. And my mother got to me probably when I was about 18 or 19, and really affected me and really kind of made me question the way that I was acting toward people in general, and to the women in my life specifically. So the exposure to abuse came very late in my life, in my early teenage years, and someone got to me shortly thereafter. And I think that a lot of guys who are, who commit sexual assaults or things like this a lot, they come from abusive backgrounds where they were seeing this sort of abuse and violence very early in their lives, and no one talked to them, or or it was, late in their lives that someone spoke to them. And so it's kind of, there, but for the grace of God go I. Like, I know how someone from my background, educated, great family, 2 parents, can shift and act out violently against women. So I know kind of where these guys are coming from, and I think that gives me some insight that other guys who were raised very well and who've never sexually assaulted women, they don't have that sort of insight in how men can do this. But I also know how men can turn around.
David, we're about to run out of time, but I have to ask, you're still friends with the woman, your friend.
Yes.
So did you ever talk to her about it, apologize, or how did that...
We just talked about it probably a year ago.
Wow.
So, I mean, this happened, like I said, 20 years ago, and we stayed friends pretty much that whole time. We lost contact with each other for several years recently, but not because of that. And we just sort of reunited maybe a year or 2 ago, and we just talked about it fairly recently.
Wow.
And she's forgiven me, and she understands, and it's we've cleared the air, which makes me feel a lot better. And I'm glad I did that, because I don't know that I could talk about it here or talk about it at Slut Walk if I hadn't dealt with it with her first.
Oh my God, it's such an important step. I really appreciate you sharing that experience, and I'm glad to share this experience. I know everyone out there watching has their own story, so I just want to thank you so much. And please think about these things, leave comments, and plant some seeds about how we can all help break this rape cycle. And thank you again. You're always amazing.
Thank you, Brad.
Let's choose to